My entire childhood, my mother casually referred to me as her insurance policy. While my older sister was groomed for the family throne, I was kept in the shadows, a breathing backup plan. But when our parents died, and the lawyer broke the seal on their final will, the ultimate betrayal wasn't what anyone expected. There is a specific, suffocating kind of silence that exists in the homes of the old money elite. I grew up in that silence, wrapped in the sprawling, cold architecture of the Harrington estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. My parents, Arthur and Margaret Harrington, were titans of commercial real estate. They built empires out of steel and glass, and they applied that same ruthless, calculating architecture to their family. To understand my family, you have to understand my older sister, Serafina. Serafina, or Sarah to the country club set, was the sun around which our entire universe orbited. She was 4 years older than me, striking, brilliant, and terrifyingly ambitious. But her golden status wasn't just born of her accomplishments, it was forged in a crucible of panic. When Sarah was 3, she was diagnosed with an aggressive form of acute leukemia. My parents, who were used to buying their way out of any inconvenience, suddenly found themselves facing a terrifying reality they couldn't control. They were told Sarah might need a bone marrow transplant. They were not matches. The donor registry was a gamble they refused to take. So they did what any pragmatic, cold-blooded billionaires would do. They manufactured a solution. They conceived me. I was designed, quite literally, to be spare parts. But fate has a funny sense of humor. 3 months before I was born, Sarah went into total remission. She never needed my cord blood. She never needed my bone marrow. And so the moment I took my first breath, I was already obsolete. I was a redundant asset in the Harrington portfolio. They never let me forget it. It wasn't always said out loud, but it was woven into the fabric of my daily existence. Sarah's bedroom was a sprawling suite overlooking the manicured gardens. Mine was a converted guest room near the back stairs, perfectly nice, but unmistakably secondary. Sarah had private tutors, equestrian lessons, and a trust fund that unlocked when she turned 18. I had public school, hand-me-down bicycles, and the constant nagging feeling of being an intruder in my own home. The most defining moment of my childhood happened when I was 11. I was hiding in the conservatory, reading a book behind a massive potted fern, when my mother walked in with her closest friend, a socialite named Beatrice. They were drinking gin and tonics, the ice clinking sharply against the crystal. "Chloe is quiet," Beatrice had remarked. "So different from Serafina." My mother sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. "Chloe was an insurance policy, Bea. You know that. We were terrified of losing Sarah. When the cancer vanished, well, we already had the second baby on the way. We do our best, but Sarah is the future of Harrington Holdings. Chloe is just here. Chloe is just here." Those words became the defining mantra of my life. I learned to make myself small, invisible, and self-sufficient. While Sarah attended Harvard Business School and began shadowing our father in the boardroom, I moved as far away as I possibly could. I went to the University of Washington in Seattle on a partial academic scholarship and a mountain of student loans my parents refused to help pay. "If you aren't studying finance, we aren't financing it," my father had declared over a rare, strained Thanksgiving dinner. I built a life on the West Coast. I became an archivist, restoring rare and damaged books. There was a profound poetry in fixing things that others had discarded. I met a man named Liam, a high school history teacher with warm eyes and a laugh that filled up a room. We got engaged. When I called my parents to tell them the news, my mother simply asked if it would interfere with Sarah's upcoming 30th birthday gala. I had accepted my role. I was the spare, the ghost, the afterthought. I thought I had made peace with it, wrapping my heart in layers of distance and geography. I thought the worst they could do to me was ignore me. I was wrong. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Seattle was drowned in a heavy, unrelenting rain, mirroring the sudden, crushing weight that fell upon my chest. It was a Detective Reynolds from the Connecticut State Police. There had been a pile-up on Interstate 95, a torrential downpour, a blown tire on a semi-truck, and a catastrophic chain reaction. My parents' chauffeured Mercedes had been crushed between two freight trucks. Arthur and Margaret Harrington were pronounced dead at the scene. They had been on their way back from a diamond jeweler in New York, picking out a custom piece for Sarah to wear to her upcoming engagement party. Even in death, their final act was in service to the golden child. I flew back to Connecticut in a daze. Liam offered to come, but I told him I needed to face the Harrington mausoleum alone. I knew what walking back into that house would do to me, and I couldn't bear for him to see me shrink back into the terrified, invisible girl I used to be. When I arrived at the estate, the heavy mahogany doors were unlocked. The house smelled of expensive lilies and lemon floor wax. There was a frantic, hushed energy in the air. Assistants and housekeepers scurried through the halls, and at the center of it all was Serafina. I expected to find my sister in ruins. Instead, I found her in the main study, flanked by our father's executive team, a clipboard in her hand. She wore a tailored black sheath dress, looking less like a grieving daughter and more like a CEO stepping into a hostile takeover. "Chloe," she said, barely glancing up from the spreadsheet in front of her. "You made it. Your room is made up. Don't touch anything in the East Wing. I have the appraisers coming tomorrow." "Appraisers," I whispered, my voice hoarse from the red-eye flight. "Sarah, Mom and Dad are dead. Their bodies aren't even—" She snapped the clipboard down on the leather-topped desk, her eyes flashing with that familiar, icy Harrington pragmatism. "They are dead, Chloe, which means the board is going to panic. The stock is going to dip. I need to project absolute control and stability. The estate needs to be inventoried. The transition of power needs to be seamless. Grief is a luxury for people who don't have a billion-dollar empire to run." The funeral was an exercise in high society theater. Over 500 people attended, a sea of black designer suits and discreetly dabbed tears. Sarah delivered the eulogy. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She spoke of our parents' vision, their legacy, and their unbreakable bond with her. She cried perfectly timed tears, her voice cracking at the exact right moment. Not once in her 10-minute speech did she mention that she had a sister. I sat in the second row, behind the executive board, utterly erased from my own family's history. In the days that followed, the house became a battleground of silent slights. Sarah began acting as the undisputed queen of the estate. She fired my mother's longtime housekeeper. She began earmarking antique furniture to be auctioned off. And then, 3 days after the funeral, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Look, Chloe," she said, pouring herself a cup of black coffee. "I know this is awkward, you being here. You don't fit into this world. You never have. You have your little life in Seattle with your teacher. His name is Liam," I said, quietly, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the marble countertop. "Right, Liam." She took a sip of her coffee. "I've spoken to the finance team. As the incoming CEO, I have discretionary access to some liquid assets before probate fully closes. I'm prepared to write you a check today for $50,000. It's generous. It'll pay off your little student loans. You can pack your bags, go back to Seattle, and we don't have to pretend to be a family anymore. She was trying to buy me off. She was trying to finalize my obsolescence before the ink on our parents' death certificates was even dry. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Beneath the tailored clothes and the arrogant smirk, I saw the frantic, desperate need to be the only one. "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Don't be stupid, Chloe. It's 50 grand, or you get dragged through a legal mess where you end up with nothing. You know Mum and Dad left everything to me. I'm the heir. You're the afterthought. Take the money." Before I could respond, the kitchen phone rang. It was one of the few landlines left in the house. Sarah snatched it up, annoyed by the interruption. Her expression shifted from irritation to a rigid, calculating mask. "Yes, Nathaniel. Yes, she's here. Fine. We'll be there at 2. She hung up the phone and looked at me, a flicker of genuine unease crossing her features for the first time since the accident. "That was Nathaniel Brooks," she said, referring to our parents' ancient, fiercely loyal estate lawyer. "He wants us both at his office this afternoon. He says it's time to read the will. And he said it's imperative that you are there." Sarah smoothed down her skirt, recovering her icy composure. "Probably just some token jewelry they left you so you wouldn't contest it," she sneered. "Get dressed. Try to look presentable." At 2 p.m. sharp, we walked into the heavy, oak-paneled offices of Brooks, Sterling, and Hayes. Nathaniel Brooks sat behind his massive desk. He was a man in his late 70s, with sharp, bird-like eyes that had seen decades of Harrington family secrets. He didn't offer us condolences. He didn't offer us water. He just looked at the two of us. Sarah sitting perfectly straight, practically vibrating with entitlement, and me, shrinking into the corner of the leather sofa. Nathaniel reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick, ivory envelope, sealed with red wax. He set it on the desk in front of him. He looked at Sarah, and then, slowly, he turned his gaze to me. There was a profound, heavy sorrow in his eyes, but also something else. A strange, sharp glint of anticipation. "Your parents updated their will exactly 1 month ago," Nathaniel said, his voice like dry gravel. "And I must warn you both. It is highly unconventional." He broke the red wax seal. The loud crack echoed in the silent room, sounding exactly like a gunshot. The heavy oak-paneled office of Brooks, Sterling, and Hayes was suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the ticking of a grand antique clock in the corner, and the harsh, rhythmic tapping of Gwendolyn's perfectly manicured fingernails against the leather armrest. You might be confused. In the previous chapters of my life, my sister went by Serafina, and I was Chloe. But a week before the accident, a bizarre public relations scandal involving a leaked, profanity-laced tirade against a barista had forced my sister to rebrand. She abruptly started going by her pristine middle name, Gwendolyn, and out of sheer petty spite, demanded I go by my middle name, Avery, so she wouldn't be the only one adjusting. It was classic Harrington manipulation, a final, absurd demand our parents catered to just days before their deaths. I was Avery now. I had always been whoever they needed me to be. Nathaniel Brooks adjusted his tortoise-shell glasses, his gaze lingering on the crackling red wax on the desk. He unfolded the thick, cream-colored parchment. I will skip the standard preamble and the minor charitable disbursements to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Robin Hood Foundation, as those remain unchanged, Nathaniel stated, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. We will move directly to Section 4, the disposition of Harrington Holdings and the primary estate. Gwendolyn leaned forward, a hungry, victorious gleam in her eyes. Let's get to it, Nathaniel. The board is waiting for my official authorization. Nathaniel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes glued to the paper. Section 4, he read aloud. To my eldest daughter, Gwendolyn, I leave the following message. We knew. We knew about the shadow accounts at J.P. Morgan Chase. We knew about the secret meetings with the executives at Apollo Global Management. We knew about your meticulously orchestrated plan to initiate a hostile takeover of Harrington Holdings, oust your mother and me, and liquidate our core commercial assets to private equity for your own unilateral, multi-billion-dollar parachute. The blood drained from Gwendolyn's face so fast she looked like a marble statue. The smugness vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. Nathaniel, what is this? She demanded, her voice shrill, cracking at the edges. This is a forgery. My father would never write this. I assure you, Gwendolyn, I drafted this myself under his strict supervision, and it was notarized in this very room exactly 30 days ago, Nathaniel said coldly before returning to the document. Your ambition, Gwendolyn, was once our greatest pride. But we have realized, too late, that it is not ambition that drives you, but a ruthless, hollow greed. You were willing to dismantle the legacy we built and terminate the employment of 6,000 loyal workers just to secure your own absolute, unchecked power. You are not a leader. You are a parasite. Gwendolyn shot up from her chair, her chest heaving. Stop reading. I am the CEO. I am the heir. You cannot read this on the record. Sit down, Nathaniel commanded, his voice suddenly booming with the authority of a man who had navigated corporate bloodbaths for half a century. Shockingly, Gwendolyn sank back into the leather cushions, her hands trembling violently. Nathaniel cleared his throat. Therefore, to Gwendolyn, we leave the sum of $1 million. This sum will be held in an irrevocable, strict spendthrift trust managed by Fidelity Investments. It will disburse a modest monthly stipend. She is hereby stripped of all titles, voting shares, and access to the Harrington estate. Furthermore, any attempt to contest this will trigger a poison pill clause, immediately releasing the dossier of her attempted corporate espionage to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The room spun. I gripped the edges of my seat, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. The golden child, the sun around which our toxic family orbited, had tried to destroy our parents, and they had caught her. It was a staggering, biblical level of hard karma. Section 5, Nathaniel continued, the harshness in his voice softening as he finally looked at me. I was frozen, a deer caught in the headlights of a crashing empire. To our youngest daughter, Avery, we spent your entire life treating you as an insurance policy. We kept you in the shadows, believing you were too soft, too quiet for the world we built. We were fools. Tears pricked the back of my eyes. It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from them, delivered from beyond the grave. In your distance, Avery, you built character. You built a life of integrity, restoring things that were broken instead of discarding them. You survived our neglect, and in doing so, you proved you are the strongest among us. Therefore, we leave the entirety of the Harrington estate, 92% of the voting shares of Harrington Holdings, and all remaining liquid assets to Avery. It is our final, desperate hope that she will use this power to heal the damage we and her sister have caused. Silence descended upon the office. It was heavy, absolute, and deafening. I was a book archivist who drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic and clipped grocery coupons. In the span of 5 minutes, I had just become the sole controlling shareholder of a multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate empire. Gwendolyn slowly turned her head to look at me. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. The pedestal she had stood on her entire life hadn't just shattered. It had vaporized. "You!" she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You manipulated them. You poisoned them against me." "I haven't spoken to them in 6 months, Gwendolyn," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the roaring in my ears. "I will destroy you!" she screamed, lunging across the space between us. Before she could reach me, Nathaniel pressed a button under his desk. 2 heavy-set security guards in dark suits entered the room immediately. "Miss Gwendolyn is leaving," Nathaniel said flatly, "and she is no longer permitted on the premises of the Harrington estate or any corporate office. Escort her out." As they dragged my screaming, thrashing sister out of the mahogany doors, Nathaniel let out a long, exhausted sigh. He closed the file, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at me. "Well, Avery," he said gently, "it seems you are no longer the spare." The next 48 hours were a blur of chaotic, high-stakes warfare. True to her nature, Gwendolyn didn't go quietly into the night. Despite the poison pill clause threatening SEC exposure, she immediately hired a team of aggressive, pit bull litigators from Kirkland and Ellis. She filed an emergency injunction to freeze the estate's assets, claiming our parents were not of sound mind when they altered the will, and that I had exerted undue influence from across the country. I was terrified. I retreated to the Greenwich estate, locking myself in my childhood bedroom, the small converted guest room near the back stairs. I sat on the floor, surrounded by piles of complex legal documents Nathaniel had sent over, feeling entirely out of my depth. I wanted to run. I wanted to take the $50,000 Gwendolyn had offered me in the kitchen and flee back to Seattle, back to my quiet life, back to Liam. And then Liam arrived. He had taken a red-eye flight the moment I called him, crying hysterically after the will reading. When he walked into my room, smelling of airplane, coffee and rain, he didn't look at the extravagant wealth of the estate. He just looked at me. He sat on the floor beside me, pulling me into his arms. "I can't do this, Liam," I sobbed into his shoulder. "She's going to crush me. She knows this world. I just fix old books." Liam pulled back, framing my face with his warm, steady hands. "Avery, look at me. You fix old books because you know how to find the missing pieces. You know how to dig through the dust and find the truth. Your sister only knows how to break things. Your parents saw that. They chose you because you are exactly what this broken family needs." His words ignited a spark in the dark, terrified corners of my mind. I wasn't a corporate shark, but I was a meticulous archivist. I knew how to follow a paper trail better than anyone. I wiped my eyes and stood up. I didn't need to fight Gwendolyn in the press or in the mud. I just needed to find the original source material. I spent the next 3 days locked in my father's private home office. It was a fortress of filing cabinets and locked mahogany drawers. While the modern corporate world ran on servers and clouds, my father was a man of the old guard. He didn't trust digital screens with his darkest secrets. He trusted paper. Using a letter opener and my keen eye for misfiled folios, I scoured a decade's worth of personal records. On the 3rd night, at 2 a.m., I found a false bottom in the lowest drawer of his antique credenza. Inside was a thick, unlabeled manila envelope. I opened it, and the ultimate truth of Gwendolyn's hard karma spilled out onto the desk. It was a comprehensive dossier compiled by a private intelligence firm. It contained printed emails, wire transfer receipts, and clandestine photographs. Gwendolyn hadn't just been planning a hostile takeover. She had actively been embezzling millions from the company's employee pension fund to artificially inflate the stock price of a dummy corporation she owned in the Cayman Islands. She wasn't just a traitor to our parents. She was a federal criminal. My father had compiled the evidence, but had died before he could turn it over to the authorities. The next morning, the board of directors of Harrington Holdings convened for an emergency session. Gwendolyn was there, flanked by her terrifying lawyers, sitting at the head of the massive glass table, as if the company was already hers. She glared at me as I walked in, wearing a simple navy blazer and carrying a single manila folder. I didn't bring Nathaniel. I didn't bring security. I just brought the truth. "This meeting is highly irregular," Gwendolyn barked as I stood at the opposite end of the table. "Avery has no standing here. Her claim to the shares is under active litigation. I am the majority shareholder until a judge says otherwise," I said, my voice remarkably steady. I looked at the 12 men and women on the board, people who had watched me grow up as the invisible ghost of the family. "I know none of you have faith in me. I know you view me as an uneducated liability. But I am not here to run this company. I am here to save it from her." I slid the manila folder down the long glass table. It stopped perfectly in front of the chairman of the board. "That is a documented history of Gwendolyn's offshore accounts with Credit Suisse," I stated clearly, my voice ringing in the cavernous room. "It outlines exactly how she spent the last 3 years siphoning capital from the employee pension funds to finance a backdoor deal with Apollo Global Management. She intended to liquidate this company and leave all of you, and thousands of employees, with absolutely nothing." The chairman opened the folder. The silence in the room grew deadly as his eyes scanned the highlighted wire transfers and the undeniable signature of my sister. The other board members crowded around, their expressions turning from skepticism to outright horror, and finally to fury. Gwendolyn turned ash white. That's fabricated. She forged those." "They are bank certified, Gwendolyn," I replied softly. "And copies were securely mailed to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and the State Prosecutor's Office at 8 a.m. this morning." The karma was absolute. The very ambition she had wielded as a weapon her entire life had finally turned back to sever her own throat. The board didn't just turn on her, they devoured her. Within an hour, her legal team from Kirkland & Ellis resigned on the spot, refusing to represent a client actively committing federal fraud. Gwendolyn was escorted out of the building, not by private security, but by 2 federal agents who had been waiting in the lobby. As the elevator doors closed on my sister's screaming, panicked face, I felt a massive, invisible weight lift off my shoulders. The ghost of the spare child vanished forever. Over the next year, I didn't keep the empire. I appointed the ethical, fiercely intelligent CFO to the CEO position, retaining my shares but stepping back from daily operations. The company thrived. I took the sprawling, cold Greenwich estate, the house where I was made to feel so small, and completely liquidated its pretentious antiques. I transformed the property into a state-of-the-art, free-of-charge residential retreat for families dealing with pediatric cancer, where there was once silence and cold ambition. There was now laughter, warmth, and healing. Liam and I moved back to Seattle. I went back to restoring old, forgotten books, bringing broken things back to life. I was born to be a spare part, a backup plan for a tragedy that never happened. But in the end, I was exactly the piece my family needed to stop the rot and build something truly beautiful.